Hello everybody, my name is Anthony Jones, and in this video tutorial I'm going to do a speed painting of an environment slash landscape type thing. It's going to be somewhat of a sci-fi theme with some organic elements in it. Mostly an outdoorsy type environment, something that should be fun and exciting. But with that being said, I will say that this app is really good in general for a lot of just great stuff. I've been using this for characters, for prop designs, and even environment stuff is not as challenging in this app than you would expect. And this is something that I think is really powerful about having a mobile device and a mobile app. Right now I'm actually using this on the iPad, as most of you may know, but I also have it on my phone, and I actually can do some of the same stuff on my phone. In fact, I've impressed people with phone demonstrations, and maybe perhaps I'll do a phone demo. But with that being said, it's not as important as just kind of going in there and painting. So let's go ahead and do some paintings. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use some of the default brushes. So if you go to the fill, there is a solid fill brush. Now the solid fill brush by far is probably one of the greatest tools that we can use, and I'll just kind of do a quick demonstration of what I'm going to do with it. So let's say we want to paint like a mountain. Just like imagine drawing a mountain. Now, why is this better than, let's say, painting it out? Well, as some of you guys may already like kind of understand the value of this immediately, it's kind of doing two things. It's doing the lasso tool and fill all at the same time. And why this is an advantage, especially if you're doing environments, because if you're trying to draw mountains the same way, okay, great, I maybe can kind of get the silhouette somewhat similar to what I just did there, but ultimately I still have to like fill it in, you know? And if you just fill bucket this way, even in some of the most premier painting softwares, this still is not very effective to fill in just using just a raw fill. And it's look at these edges, they're not nearly as like sharpened or scaled well. Now there's a place for this type of brush. I think when painting characters and drawing, this works really well, but for doing environments, you kind of want to like have these big shapes that represent large objects, because one of the things that people get wrong about environments is scale. And so you want to like use this kind of, oh, I'm still using the, let me go to fill. Excuse me. You want to like use this ability to kind of like just draw this really small scaled stuff. It's pretty great. I mean, in just a short amount of time, I'm able to like kind of block in some of these cool landscape shapes. You know, and this is just like many of the other tools in Infinite Painter, where you can, you know, just draw really quickly and then hold it, and it will try to like get a more, you know, essentially more straight or more curved line that looks a little bit more professional, a little bit more, what you call it, well drawn through, right? Because now it looks like, you know, very clean and very sleek. Obviously, there's going to be some limitations, but if you look at how this works, and we can kind of get rid of some of these points, make it even simpler. But if you look at how this works, you can get like a really nice kind of obelistic shape if you want. This is obviously a little round, just a little too cartoony. But if I were to kind of have a little bit more of like a rigid, I can kind of get some of these more rigid, more straight angles off to the side, as long as I draw better straight. But what I really want you guys to focus on is just how powerful the fill tool is for this specific scenario. And it's really great, man, like, because you can just sit here and just kind of just draw these small details. What I'm doing here is I'm just kind of skipping across, and it helps me create like what would normally be like a line, but it's like a little bit more dynamic than a line, because especially if I give it a little bit of like variation as I go straight across, it can create this beautiful sense of rock and texture. But this is pretty good for now. So I'm going to go ahead and, start another painting, essentially doing the same thing here, but just maybe now focusing on a larger scope idea, and actually start to paint something in and show you kind of how I'd go about doing this using a very various amount of brushes that are normally used for painting, but this fill brush is specifically, I'm using it for this painting and this demonstration. That's why I wanted to kind of talk about it before I went right ahead and did the actual painting. So let's go ahead and jump into that. All right, so let's go ahead and make a new layer. And this time I'm going to go ahead and begin painting something that's actually going to look pretty cool. I'm going to try to do an actual environment this time. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually change the background color. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's kind of do something that's a little bit more, desaturated in midday. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to build out my elements through distance. So normally whenever you're painting with a character, you don't have to really deal with that many elements that really require spacing and distance in between it. And you'll see what I'm talking about. And so kind of preparing for this is probably one of the smartest things you can do. And so one of the first things I'm going to do is kind of focus on what's going to be the main star of the show. And it's most likely going to be somewhere in the midground. And it's going to most likely be some sort of, sci-fi element. And so I'm going to draw essentially some sort of spire like I drew in the previous demonstration. But this time I'm actually trying to think about how the detail is going to look. And you can see like I take my time with it. And unlike the lasso tool, getting this small kind of detail in is really hard to really push scale. But look at like how far this feels based off of how small those little scribbles I've been making, right? And if I really want to get in there and do a good job, I can zoom in and get some more of these kind of like hard, rich, scaled feeling details. But I don't really want to zoom in too often because then it prevents me from seeing the bigger picture. Just like with characters, you don't want to be zoomed in at all with anything you do. I've been working on, for instance, like comic book stuff lately, and I zoom in, and it's kind of like the same problem that I see a lot of students run into, I'm encountering, and I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I zoomed in? And it's just like a natural tendency, especially when you're learning something, to kind of like get in and focus in on your very specific problems. Like okay, I'm not drawing the eye correctly, so I'm going to zoom in on the eye and work on it until I get it, and then you zoom out and everything looks kind of off, the proportions are wrong, perspective seems weird. This is true for characters, this is true for environments, this is true for storyboarding, comic book paneling, and so zooming out just lets you see the full picture, lets you see what's mostly going to be the biggest reads of your image. So now that I've done this, I'm going to create like another story element. And the colors aren't that important just yet. And so I'm going to try to make this a little cooler and add some sort of spaceship, kind of like some sci-fi sail ship or something. And I'm going to draw like the actual boat part of it right here. Now this part I think I can probably get away with drawing with actual brushes that I'm used to using, but I think I'm going to try to minimize the amount of brushes I use out of the gate for the sake of speed. So you can see here, I've created my story, okay? So now I have all the pieces to tell a compelling story. Now I just got to make it feel compelling and actually feel a little bit more like it has some place in space. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go with a much lighter value, and I'm going to start thinking about maybe the sky. And I'm going to cut out the mountains. Reverse style. And maybe there's other spires in the distance. So let's go ahead and put those spires in. And they got to be remarkably smaller, especially if I want to try to sell this distance. And maybe there's a plane here, and then that should be good. And so that feels real nice and far. Let's go ahead and create maybe another detail here and add some clouds. And I'm just drawing the shapes of these things because it's going to help with the sense of spacing. And I'm going to probably create another one behind this. Oh, I just realized because I did the sky, it's going to have like a harder time creating this illusion. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep it on the same layer here. And just be precise with it. And so what's great about this is that I can manipulate this and make it look really fascinating and really airy by smudging it. But I'm going to do that later. Right now, the goal is to tell a compelling story with the shapes that I've been given. Yeah, so this is looking cool already. So now we have a foreground element, and this is really important because this is going to show us stuff that's much closer to us. And the angle in which we're standing, it's clear to me that we're in a position where we're looking, we're kind of on a higher cliff, and we're kind of looking up. But I want to make sure that it still feels like these elements in this darker value are much closer to us. But I'm going to undo that last change because I don't want it to feel like anything is competing with height than the background elements and the midground element. Okay, this is great. So now that I have a lot of that going, I'm going to go ahead and add in some of the more airy stuff that's going to make it feel a little bit more atmospheric. Okay? And so right here, what I'm going to do is stop the video and show you the next part in the next video. So right here, before we get into that, I'm going to explain again, all I'm doing is blocking in the larger features, which took me a few minutes. And in this next phase, you're going to see things are going to move much quicker, and I'm going to be able to really pop stuff out really fast. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the next video. So I have my colors ready to go. So what you're going to see me do now is essentially begin to paint my design and feel a little bit more free. This is, again, a demonstration of speed painting. So I'm going to just aggressively just start painting and not really worry too much about how much I've done in the beginning. All this stuff is to help me kind of control the original state of my painting, the beginning values of my painting, my art, so that way I have something that I can work from the start. So now that I have all the things that I think are useful to me, I'm going to go ahead and begin laying in some really aggressive colors, and I'm going to do that on its own layer on the very top. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add in, let's say, just this really bright red. Why? Because I think that will be really charming and it'll add a lot of accent to this environment. And I'm using this value specifically because it's cutting across the landscape, and it's very stark, and it's going to be very meaningful. And then now we're going to go ahead and take a look at this and see where this is in the value range, see how we can get a red value that makes sense, that would live on this mountain. And I'm going to go ahead and just splash it in. I'm going to have moments where I'm thinking where the light could hit this and could tell us a story, but try not to have it compete too much with the background. And so then once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and throw in maybe some other things here. Let's go ahead and throw in some values that will help add some more juice this whole environment. And this is really fun part of the painting process for me, because I get to really just kind of experiment and throw in and mess around with the painting a lot more aggressively. And once I get this going, I usually make a layer that is just like an airbrush. And this airbrush is essentially like the sky, maybe with like a little bit more brightness. And I just kind of like give everything a little bit of like atmosphere. And I'll also pick it out the foreground and really create like this sense of space. What's cool is that I have everything on its own layer, so I can pop it back up, including my foreground elements that might have been painted over, and leave them on top, which is what I want to do. And then we can go ahead and make another layer, and we can come back and be aggressive again and begin to paint over this. And what you'll find is that when you kind of have this opportunity to kind of go back and forth, and you have things on their own layers and you haven't really painted them out, you can really have fun with the painting. And now that we have this atmospheric fog that's kind of going through everything, we can actually now use some of the gradations and create spacing between certain large objects. All right, and so then now that I have like a lot more of this atmosphere and what have you, I can kind of go in here and maybe add elements to finally clip these clouds in a way that makes it a little more interesting. And now we have our ship, and I actually already locked our ship's transparency. This is because I was going to aggressively paint in colors on this as well. And let's go ahead and put in some lighting that will make this sail pop. And then we would need something over here to tell us that this is being lit somehow, and to add some features that will add some design to this and bring some charm. And it looks like there's like this bottom part is kind of like a lava, like, or magma of some sort, which is cool. So I'm going to maybe play with that a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some more harsher contrasts to this, because it's a little bit closer to us, and this is a little bit more of the subject matter too. And because it's on its own layer, I can move it compositionally out of the way, and this needs to be on top. So it can maybe fit the top third quarter. I can also shrink it to add some more sense of scale. I think it was a little bit fine, a little bit bigger. And then once I have that, this is honestly all I would need to begin. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to group both of these together. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a copy merged so that my top layer is essentially that, everything that you just saw there. And then that way I can really just go to town and paint on top of it, which I'm going to spend in the next 5 to 10 minutes. And all I'm going to do is just add more and more detail to make this look a little bit more interesting. All right. So just want to talk a little bit about what I just did. It's not going to take too much more of your guys' time. But essentially, I just, worked with the piece that I had. I went and added more texture. I used the smudge tool, the beautiful, beautiful smudge tool, to add atmosphere and fog in some areas that may use a little bit more softening. And, just kind of brought it all together to make it feel like a nice, cohesive piece. Hope you guys learned a lot from this tutorial. I definitely love painting in this app. I definitely love doing a lot of work in here. And this, was probably roughly a 15-minute, maybe 20-minute speed painting, real quick, real dirty, but it gets the point across. So hope you guys learned a lot. I can't wait to see what you guys do in Infinite Painter and with your guys' speed paintings. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Cheers.